Hi, and welcome to the live series Straight Off the Bat. Join us on Thursdays as we speak to individuals across multiple industries that help you understand financial literacy and education. If you join us on Facebook, don't forget to like and follow our page to stay updated with content that will help you manage your money. I'm your host, Pauline Joseph, and today we're looking into a discussion about smart money talks inside BATT's new leadership vision. Our guest today is Keston Howell. He is the new executive director at the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, aka he's our new boss. So we'll be on our best behavior, kind of. We'll see. You let me know on the comment section what questions you have for him. So, Mr. Howell brings to BATT more than 3 decades of leadership experience across the financial services sector and a distinguished career spanning banking, insurance, investments, capital markets, and wealth management. Prior to joining BATT, he served in senior roles within major financial institutions and actively contributed to industry development through his involvement with key sectors bodies, including the Securities Dealers Association of Trinidad and Tobago and the Association of Trinidad and Tobago Insurance Companies. So we're going to bring Keston in because, this always seems like a long time, an hour, 60 minutes. But as we all know, money is part of our lives and we want to squeeze out as much information from Keston as possible. So how are we today, Keston?
Good morning, Pauline. I'm fine, thank you. Good morning to your viewers. Happy
All
to be
right.
here.
So happy to have you. So as I mentioned before, you're the new boss, but we've been doing this for 5 years. So as our viewers know, I tend to ask the difficult questions. So let's start with one that's ease you in. You assumed the role as executive director of BATT in December 2025. What inspired you to take on this position at this stage of your career?
I think, Pauline, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure about inspire, but I could probably share how it happened. I mean, I retired from my last job in December of 2024, and I spent a little over a year in retirement. But I would say by month 7 or month 8, I started to feel a little restless, a little bored, and I began to contemplate, how could I use that 30 years experience in the financial services sector to contribute in a way that was less institutional and probably more from an industrial sectoral perspective. And as fate would have it, and I believe in manifestation, the opportunity came to interview for the executive director position at BATT. And I thought that it would be a good opportunity for me to use that experience and shift from what I call institutional leadership to industry leadership and contribute to a sector which I'm grateful that has provided me with the opportunity to meet the needs of myself and my family, but to contribute in developing that sector in a meaningful way from a national developmental perspective. So that's how I ended up at BATT.
Okay, well, it sounds interesting because just like some of the greats, Jay-Z, Cher, even Michael Jackson, you came out of retirement. So thank you for that. Um, so when it comes to, because we want to get some insight on your mindset as to some of your priorities and goals that you may be looking into when it comes to your leadership role in the association.
Well, I would say that my approach to that topic, Pauline, is collaborative. So when I came on board in December, one of the first things that we did with the team was to develop a strategic plan. So together with the team, we kind of thought about what were the pressing issues impacting on the financial services sector. But we started off with the view that we wanted to shift the perspective of BATT to more a thought leadership role in terms of how could BATT be a thought leader in the financial services space. So as we examined those issues which we felt were pressing for the sector, we came up with 4 strategic pillars. And the first is that as a thought leader, we wanted to promote informed discussion or dialogue on matters of national interest. And that quite naturally would change depending on what was pressing from a national perspective at the time. Key for us in that area would be the whole concept of economic diversification and what role could BATT play in terms of facilitating that transition to being a less energy dependent nation. The second pillar was really what role could BATT play in terms of strengthening consumer protection, financial protection, as well as building customer trust in the sector. And in that area, we feel that there's an important role for us to play in developing financial literacy, digital literacy, engaging with the SME sector in a far more meaningful way, paying more attention to how the sector deals with the disabled population, in particular the blind and visually impaired, as well as taking into account, given the prevalence of cybersecurity, and that's linked with digital literacy. But how could we engage the various stakeholders in terms of building stronger defense mechanisms in cybersecurity? The third pillar would be we wanted to help champion the development of a strong national payments infrastructure, which would aid in terms of ease of doing business. And finally, we felt that we needed to demonstrate to the customer base and to the wider public that BATT is in fact caring and very methodical in terms of how it treats with some of those societal governance and probably environmental issues. So demonstrate some caring, protective leadership in the sector. So those four pillars pretty much informed the strategic initiatives that we laid out and the action plans that we are working on to achieve those initiatives.
Wow, that's a lot to cover, and I definitely am excited to as to what's ahead, because doing this over the last couple of years as the host, I've learned so much from our guests as well as our audience. So it's exciting to see what we have moving forward. So, as I mentioned earlier in your introduction, you have over 30 years of experience. I mean, I don't know how you do that, because I don't know, did you start at 10 years old? Gosh, so well done. And for a lot of folks, it's this financial conversation is new, because I've mentioned on this show thousands of times, many of us did not have that conversation with our parents, because let's be honest, our parents, they don't know what they don't know. So with your experience and your understanding in the financial space, what is one of the key differences have you seen over the last, multiple decades in terms of understanding financial literacy?
Oh, that's an interesting question, Pauline. I think the greatest shift, certainly over my career, and I think it really would be the shift from probably what I would describe as analog banking to digital banking. From an analog banking perspective, I think the fundamentals remain the same, and it governs how we approach financial literacy in terms of teaching the basics in terms of saving, budgeting, investing, and generally having a financial plan that would guide whatever goals that an individual has. I think with the shift to digital banking and the use of digital banking tools, it has kind of forced us to consider the role that we play in terms of helping our customers use those tools safely. So in that context, it's where we enter the discussion in terms of digital literacy. So we have a responsibility to alert the public in terms of the risk of financial scams using those tools, and to equip them in terms of what are the skills they need to develop to counteract those attempts to defraud them via those tools. So I would say that would be the most greatest shift that I've seen, certainly in my career. And we could go into that some more.
So we speak about financial literacy on this show all the time. And you mentioned digital literacy. So I don't want to take for granted that everyone knows what these terminology means. So just give us a quick insight as far as you see, Keston. What is digital literacy?
Well, digital literacy really is about developing the knowledge, the skills, attitude, and behavior. But rather than developing that around financial matters, it's really about digital matters in terms of how one operates in a safe and confident fashion within the digital ecosystem. So the same way we would teach someone in terms of the basics of savings or the elements of investing, we try to highlight what are those risks in terms of using those various tools. So we talk about phishing or vishing or smishing or vishing or quishing and all these terminologies that I myself am only now becoming familiar with. And to equip our young people and adults and hopefully older people in terms of how you should identify those risks. What are those warning kind of signals that you would come across, whether you receive a SMS or a voicemail or an email, how one should identify those mechanisms and the things that you could do to protect yourselves from that. So in terms of your password management, the kind of passwords you develop, warning persons not to have the same password for several accounts, multi-factor authentication, things like that would be what we would get into in the context of digital literacy as opposed to financial literacy.
Well, thank you so much for that. And in the context of literacy, you mentioned, the phishing and the vision for me as well, brand new terms. But it's a lot of the times it's like, oh, I've heard this happen, but I didn't know there was a name for it. So it helps bring along the conversation. But when it comes to financial literacy, as it relates to Trinidad and Tobago, because we see so much information across the global, especially American influence, because we're so close by, what do you think is the biggest gap that exists today in a local context when it comes to financial literacy?
Whew, as I said before, financial literacy is about building the knowledge, skills, experience, attitudes, behaviors around financial matters. I think the sector has been doing a very good job in terms of doing that. I think that initiative has been done by various stakeholders, but I think the central bank, as far back as 2007, started what is described as a national financial literacy program. As part of that initiative, they put together a national financial literacy committee, which comprises a lot of the stakeholders who operate in the financial services space. And over that period, from time to time, the central bank would initiate surveys, which kind of gives us a clue in terms of the progress that we're making on financial literacy. So the most recent survey would have revealed certain fact findings. So we try to operate as much as we can with the data that is before us. And I suppose we could take some comfort because the survey did indicate that largely we have a decent level of financial literacy in Trinidad and Tobago. Not surprisingly, financial literacy was higher among females. It was higher among those who are university graduates, and it was higher among those who are middle income and higher income earners. But notwithstanding the strides that we've made in financial literacy, there is still a fair level of or lack of awareness around financial literacy by the public. So those persons are not familiar with the term, they're not familiar with the National Financial Literacy Program. So clearly, a gap that exists is that we need to be more consistent about the financial literacy initiatives. And while a lot of that tends to happen around Global Money Week or maybe in the early part of the year, I think we need to have those initiatives across the calendar year and with the various demographics to make sure that we're reaching everyone, the elderly, the young, male, female entrepreneurs, self-employed. We really need to be more deliberate in terms of how we can meet all those wider groups. The other thing that the survey suggested is that, and I suppose this came out of COVID, people were really struggling financially. So incomes may have been impacted. A dual income household may now be a single income household. So it kind of pointed us to the need for us to be a little more deliberate in terms of helping people develop coping skills. And those coping skills really would come from the need to be a little more intentional relative to financial planning. With scarce resources, it's even more important for you to have a plan, to have a budget, to identify priorities, to save if you can, and you could always save a little bit for the rainy day, so that you manage your financial position easier, because if you have a lot more resources, it's easier to kind of just go along. The other areas, from my perspective, and this didn't necessarily come from the survey, is that I think as a society, we need to be a little more focused in terms of long-term planning. And what do I mean by that? From a long-term planning perspective, and I'm focusing here a lot on our younger population. When you're young, you tend to be go happy, go lucky. You don't think at some point in time you're going to be like Heston and retired. And once you enter retirement, your income, depending, certainly if you are an employed person, is going to drop. And you need to think about two things will happen. One, inflation will make things more expensive. And at retirement, your income is going to drop. So I think persons need to start early and think about retirement planning and prepare for the day that you're going to retire. And I encourage young people to start now. You're in your 20s or even early 30s, it's important to start thinking about retirement and looking at those products which are available in the banking sector, in the insurance sector, even to some extent in terms of the securities company sector, to make those investments so that you retire a little more comfortably. I think the other thing from my perspective that is often overlooked from a financial literacy or perspective would be what I describe as personal risk management. And by personal risk management, I think it's important for individuals to think about those risks that we face, given the fact that we are human beings and we are mortal. So the obvious one there is mortality risk. At some point, we are all going to die, some of us sooner rather than later. But if you are the sole breadwinner or a significant breadwinner for a family, I think it's important for you to prepare financially for the contingency that you may die and the family be impacted. And life insurance offers us the opportunity to mitigate against that risk. And term life in particular is affordable and provides the kind of protection that I don't think any other life financial instrument provides. The other one that comes to mind is health risk. So you may not die, but you may be incapacitated, and which will impact your ability to earn for your family. And again, there are financial products that assist in terms of managing that risk. So you have your health insurance to be sure if you get sick, you have the financial resources to get medical help. And there are also critical illness policies, which again, depending on if you get certain named conditions, provides you with a lump sum that enables you to help yourself from a medical perspective. So I would say from my perspective, those are the major gaps that I think as a society we need to address and help people to get comfortable with.
Well, thank you so much. I think all those points were extremely important. The biggest takeaway I got from that was from your central bank survey information, which says that women are more than likely financially more literate than men, which is very important during this auspicious time of March Women's Month. So we're going to go into a conversation around financial literacy when it comes to smart money and Global Money Week. So join us right after the break. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Straight Off the Bat, a show that helps you understand financial literacy and education. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're doing so from YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our page to continue seeing content and help you manage your money. Today, we're covering the topic Smart Money Talks inside BATT's new leadership vision. We are joined by Keston Howell. He is the new executive director at the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. He brings a wealth of knowledge with over 3 decades of leadership experience. So we have a lot to learn from him. If you're just joining us and you miss any of the discussion, not to worry. This live will be available on social media, so you could check it on the replay. And we want to bring back in Keston. Shout out to Angie joining us from Facebook. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you have any questions for Keston, now is the time to ask him because we don't have that much time. So, just before the break, we were discussing some of the key challenges and issues that exist within the financial space for Trinidad and Tobago. And we did discuss financial literacy. And in that same breath, we want to talk about Global Money Week, which theme was or is Smart Money Talks. So I want to ask Keston, why is it important for BATT to actively engage young people in meaningful conversations about money?
Well, that's an easy one, Pauline. And maybe for the benefit of the viewers, we could speak to Global Money Week and what that is. Global Money Week is a global initiative really with the focus of developing financial literacy among our young people. And as I said before, what that really means is developing knowledge, skills, behaviors, attitudes around financial matters. From a BATT perspective, we've been associated with this initiative for the last 7 years, and we've really seen the benefit in terms of what that means to the young people as we go out to primary and secondary schools across TNT. This year, the theme for Global Money Week is Smart Money Talks. And what that theme seems to, or wants to, or aims to achieve is to shift the focus probably more from knowledge building to the development of critical thinking skills. So you know about saving, you know about budgeting, you may know a little bit about the importance of investing, but how do you use that knowledge to develop the critical thinking skills that would make you more confident operating in the financial space? So we feel that it's important that we help young people feel comfortable talking about money, thinking about money, and how they behave around money. Because if we don't have those conversations, we won't be able to translate that knowledge into those skills that would allow our young people to operate in that space and do well. So in that context, when we craft our program, this year, we're really trying to shift from just talking, or I should say teaching or lecturing about these financial matters, to more interactive sessions, which would help young people think about what they've learned and how they apply that knowledge in the context of various financial scenarios. In that context, and we touched on it earlier, we feel that given the fact that our young people are growing up in a digital economy, they need to be comfortable in terms of developing those skills which would allow them to navigate those financial tools in a safe and confident manner. So we develop a kind of curricula that helps them understand what online banking is, what those tools are, what you can achieve using those tools, but also being mindful of the need to understand that once you engage with those tools, there are certain risks and how to treat with those risks as I've shared before. So I think ultimately the approach to financial education in Global Money Week for 2026 is about empowering our youth to operate confidently in that space, to be able to navigate that space with a fair amount of curiosity so that they could challenge things that they meet when they see it online or they get a call, so that they begin to be able to identify financial scams, ask questions like, is this too good to be true? And therefore avoid those kind of pitfalls in terms of those scams that are in the financial, or I should say the digital ecosystem.
All right. Thank you so much for that information. So, Keston, we want to get a little bit personal here, because that's just how we do it on the Straight Off the Bat show. When it comes to this financial conversation, we can't have it without having some personal insight for you. So, we're talking about smart money talks and we're talking about the youth. Do you have any particular incident with your children where you could say, okay, this was a financial lesson, not just for your children, but for yourself as well?
Oh, that's a tough one, Pauline. Really, nothing comes to mind. What I could share is that all of my kids are creatives. So unlike their parents who have operated in the financial services space, they've all decided to operate in the creative space. So I have three kids who operate in fashion. So they're trying to build a business in terms of that creative industry, in terms of fashion. And I have a son who has decided to become a music producer. So it's a little different for me. So what from my teach point was that younger people have become a little more fearless in terms of how they treat with their financial future. I could say for a fact that at their age, I didn't have that confidence in terms of venturing into entrepreneurial kind of side of life. I felt a lot more safer and secure being employed. But that's a lesson for me in the sense that if you have that confidence and you have the mindset, I think you're able to marry two things. One is the passion for your passion in terms of what you like and what you really enjoy, with an opportunity to make money. But it's not easy. And that is something I try to tell them all the time. Because working for yourself, as you could probably identify, because you're a successful entrepreneur in your own right, brings with it still different levels of pressure. People glamorize it in terms of thinking that it's easy. But whereas someone who may work and have an 8 to 4 job may be able to switch off at the end of the day or on weekends, as an entrepreneur, you're always working. I think as an entrepreneur as well, there is a tendency to focus on what you're comfortable with. So if you're into fashion, you focus on the creative side, you feel comfortable in doing that, but not recognizing that running a business is a lot more than just leveraging your natural talents or skills or passion. I think it's important as we try to teach when we develop our capacity building courses for the SME sector, that there are a lot of other skills that are important in developing a successful business. So one needs to be savvy in terms of financial management. You need to know how that works. You need to understand the difference between sales and profits, and how that is going to impact your business. You need to be very vigilant in terms of your cash flow, again, because sales does not necessarily translate to cash flow. It may. One needs to know how to develop a strategic plan. Um, One has to develop the confidence and speaking skills and relationship skills, not only to grow the sales of your business, but how you interact with those partners, such as suppliers or even your bankers as you approach them for loan capital. And you also need to develop what I call relationship skills in terms of how you treat with your team members. So I think what I've learned as my kids embark in terms of their own creative careers is the need to twin what we take for granted in the financial services space in terms of those skills that you develop and marry it with the natural kind of talents they have, whether it be fashion, music, what have you, to build a successful business.
You know, you started off with saying you didn't have anything in mind, but I think we we pulled away quite a lot of information there. And shout out to Candice on LinkedIn. The advice on skill development for entrepreneurs is excellent, and I do agree with the glamorization of entrepreneurship. I don't know who's telling these lies, but it's hard work. And I want to say congratulations to you, because to be able to create an environment where your children have the desire to chase their passion starts from you and their mother. So congrats on that. Um, so there's a lot to pull from there, and I think for those who are just joining us, because we quite had a few as you were discussing, we had a few people joining us. We spoke about economic diversification before, so we want to expand on that when we come right after the break, because there's some pillars that within the BATT vision that I think you guys need to know a little bit more of. So we'll be right back. And welcome back to Straight Off the Bat, a show that helps you understand financial literacy and education. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're doing so on LinkedIn, don't forget to subscribe to our page to continue seeing content that'll help you manage your money. Today, we're covering the topic Smart Money Talks inside BAT's new leadership vision. We're joined by Keston Howell. He is the new executive director of the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. And with over 3 decades of experience, we have so much to learn from him. So we're bringing Keston back in. I just want to shout out Keno. He's joining us from YouTube. I say he, but I don't want to misgender anybody. You are joining us from YouTube, as well as Robert. I've seen your message and your question. Unfortunately, we cannot answer that today. I think it's best if you go directly to your bank with those questions. So just before the break, we were discussing economic diversification, which is a lot to say and it feels overwhelming, but we were discussing it earlier as one of the pillars for BAT's vision. And I want to expand on that a little bit more. So I would like Keston to share that in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as you as a personal individual with your finances, because a lot of us go to work, have a job and have a salary, but a lot of us don't think about economic diversification from a personal perspective. So can you give us a bigger lens, a wider lens from Trinidad, and then bring it down from a personal perspective?
Yeah, sure. So again, I think the whole issue of economic diversification is one I think we've had as a country probably since I was going to primary school, not even secondary school. I think as a nation, we've been very fortunate to be blessed with natural resources, particularly in the oil and energy sector. And our success in terms of utilizing those resources and building a strong, resilient economy has to somewhat handicapped us in terms of looking at ways in which we could also grow the economy, and tourism is an obvious one. So, from a BAT perspective, we believe that we need to begin to identify those sectors, particularly within the SME space, because as we all know, SMEs are really the bedrock of most economies. They're certainly the sector that is responsible for the largest amount of employment, probably outside of the government or public sector. So as we look at economic diversification from a BAT perspective, we want to be able to have collaborations with places like the TT Chamber, the TTMA, in terms of what we could do as society, civil CSOs or NGOs or whatever you want to call it, to help contribute to the development of that sector. So clearly, part of it is going to be developing capacity building, as I mentioned before, in terms of helping that sector enhance its skills so it could become a better business. But we also want to focus on those SMEs which probably have export potential, of which the services sector is a key element, because I think Trinidad is fortunate. We have a lot of educated people, we have a lot of bright people, we have a lot of experienced people who operate in the services sector who can contribute to the development of businesses outside of Trinidad and Tobago. So we need to find a way in terms of how we facilitate that evolution from inward looking to outward looking for opportunities. In terms of the good space, I think we'd find that oftentimes one of the constraints would be to whether or not these businesses understand what is required to begin to export goods. So again, we need to do some teaching, and global TNT in some of our earlier discussions is a government entity which is very much interested in facilitating exports and who is willing to assist businesses understand how you get into the export market, what you should look for. The TTMA, obviously, their members have a fair amount of experience. So we need to find some way in terms of leveraging on that knowledge and experience to help guide some of those smaller SMEs who may have an ambition of entering exports do so. I think the other constraint that we could probably identify is as a growing SME, how does one access capital, which would allow you to grow your business? And I think the banks have a responsibility. They're probably working together with government in terms of what are some of the programs we could develop that would help those businesses that demonstrate potential, that demonstrate that they have the skills necessary to run a profitable and effective business, access the kind of capital that would be required. So one of the things that we have in our strategic plan is that as a sector, we need to develop, I suppose, credit frameworks around those sectors that we feel would be have a greater opportunity of doing well in the export market, as well as probably mapping out the journey from a small business to a probably larger, more established business in terms of what does that look like? What does the various tools that would help you grow in that space look like? But more importantly, what are the things that you would need to do as a business to be able to access those tools or the financing in a realistic manner? so that you're not guessing, so that when you approach the bank, you have a pretty good idea in terms of whether or not one would qualify for financing. And so you could begin to do some work in terms of treating with those conditions precedent that would be necessary for one to be successful in raising funds. I think from an individual's perspective, in terms of diversification, I think there are two ways I want to look at that. In terms of one's own job security, I think it is important that you begin to plan how you treat with that in the context of your own individual skills development. Because as we enter into an environment where artificial intelligence is probably going to change the skills requirement required in various industries, I think persons have a responsibility in terms of treating with the skills that they require to operate in a very fast pace changing environment. So as a person operating that space, how do I see my job changing given the advent of AI, depending on the sector that one operates in? And if you identify that, what do I need to do to develop my own skills so that I stay relevant in the context of what is happening? And from a savings and investment perspective, how do I develop a diversified portfolio that would allow me to manage the risk in that changing environment? And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of helping people understand how to invest and what are the tools needed to develop a diversified portfolio. And it's something that we wanted to discuss with the Security Dealers Association, because we have a lot of experts operating in that space in terms of what they could do to begin to join the conversation in terms of financial literacy, but with an angle in terms of the investment space.
Such important information and a lot to cover there. And I like what you said about the AI, because a lot of times there's this sort of doomsday narrative around artificial intelligence. But I think it's important for us to learn how are we going to evolve our skills with AI, because just like the internet, it's not going anywhere. So we have to figure out how to move with it and learn with it. And I would like to also discuss about, when we talk about the future, BATT's 30th anniversary is coming up next year. What plans do you want to give some exclusive insights?
Any exclusive insight, Pauline? I mean, BAT has been around a long time. You're right. It was formed in 1997, so we celebrate our 30th anniversary next year. I think as we have the internal dialogue in terms of BAT's own evolution in its space, I think the viewers, and I expressed it earlier, is that we want to move from just being an advocate for the members of BAT within the financial services space to being a thought leader that would contribute in a meaningful way to national development. And that has a number of implications. So it means that we need to start thinking about how we could position BAT so that anytime the public or private sector speaks about national development, they begin to think about BAT as a national partner and seek out our input in terms of whatever development efforts that may be occurring in the space. So one example of that is what I alluded to earlier, is the whole discussion around a national payment system. I mean, this has been something that I understand has been discussed for a long time. There's been a kind of stop and start effort on it. But we really feel that as a society, we need to get together and begin to have a real discussion in terms of how we could begin to develop a national payments infrastructure that works for the country, that doesn't necessarily reinvent the wheel, that would facilitate our gradual evolution to a cashless society. So that is something that we want to see if we could try to influence. And even in terms of the digital space and the whole concept of how we build trust in that space, we feel that there's a need for BAT to be a little more forthright in terms of trying to develop collaborative partnerships with stakeholders to begin to influence cybersecurity safeness. And let me just explain what I mean. So clearly, if you operate in the digital space, we know there's a fair amount of fraud, but that involves several players. Obviously, it involves use of the banking system, the banking tools, but telecommunication providers would be a key player as well because fraudsters tend to use those tools. And there would be the regulators like the Telecommunications Authority who would oversee the performance of the sector. So, can we get these parties into a room and begin to have real discussions in terms of how we develop reporting protocols that makes it easier in terms of treating with incidences of fraud? Can we share information more frequently and more consistently so we begin to pick up those patterns and begin to be a little more proactive in terms of how we treat with fraud? What could we do as a sector or as the various stakeholders to engage the population more so to develop that first line of defense against fraud in terms of how individuals behave and they treat and how they use those tools? So that's how I see BAT evolving, that we become far more involved in some of these national discussions in various matters, which may impact the financial service space, sometimes it may not, but ultimately it impacts the quality of the life of our citizens and helps us to be a trusted voice when we speak about national development in whichever sphere.
All right. Well, I'll take that as an exclusive, not to worry. I feel like that's some information there for all of us to take in. We do have some comments in the on LinkedIn as well as YouTube. Alyssa, I want to ask you a question, but I'm not clear on what your question is. So if you can just maybe give me another sentence on that one because I'm not clear on that. But we are going on a break. And when we come back, we're going to get back to your comments. Don't worry. We're going to try and get as much information out from casting as possible. So we'll be right back.
Tired of feeling lost when it comes to your money? Want to make your money work more for you? Then tune in to Straight Off the Bat, brought to you by the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Every Monday at 8:30 p.m. on TV6, right after the news. We'll give you practical tools and strategies to help you manage your money wisely, from budgeting basics, debt management, to wealth creation. We'll cover it all. No jargon, just straight talk. Join our host, Pauline Joseph, as she speaks to experts across the industry to empower you to take control of your money. Straight Off the Bat, Mondays at 8:30 p.m. on TV6. Brought to you by the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago.
And welcome back to Straight Off the Bat, a show that helps you understand financial literacy and education. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're doing so from Facebook, don't forget to subscribe to our page to continue seeing content and help you manage your money. Today, we're covering the topic Smart Money Talks inside of BAT's new leadership vision. Our guest today is Howell. He is the new executive director at the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, aka our new boss. So we're not going to do any sucking up to him because we have questions to ask, right? So we're going to go bring him back in. Keston, are you there? There we are.
I'm here.
All right. So I'm going to just go into the comments for a quick heads up from Abigail. We in the NPO sector appreciate BAT's support, capacity building, and digital literacy is vital. Constant and clear communication on would close important gaps. Oh, client communications would close important gaps. So basically, there's some support from the NPO sector. You have some insight, Kenson, on as to what NPO stands for?
I think so.
You
I,
want to
I yeah, it's a kind of new term. I suppose CSOs is the term that I am more comfortable with, civil service organizations.
okay.
NPO might be non-profit organizations, but it's all
Right.
kind of lumped together
All right,
in that
Abigail. I
space.
hope I hope we got that right. And Alyssa, I asked earlier. I'm not clear on the question, but I'm gonna put it out there. Maybe we can both translate it. Utilizing already existing digital wallets. This is when you were discussing economic diversification.
I'm not sure what that means. I'm no expert in terms of digital wallets, but from my perspective, the
Sorry
develop,
to cut you. We got some live updates on the question. When he stated using technology available in banking, did he mean utilizing digital wallets, for example?
I think that's part of it. I don't know if we quite there as yet. The technology is varied as we develop the digital space. From a digital wallets perspective, I'm a strong advocate that we need as a nation to move towards more of a cashless society. I think it's going to help big time. It helps with security. It helps with financial inclusion because we need to find a way of bringing in the unbanked. So from an entrepreneurial perspective, if we could get the gardeners, the plumbers, and some of those persons who may not have bank accounts or may not feel comfortable dealing with banks, using some of those digital tools, I think it facilitates commerce in a broader way that would allow, certainly in this environment where with crime, that people could operate in a space that feel safer without having to walk around with cash.
It's so interesting. While you were discussing different, sectors, I keep hearing Mark Cape from Free Citizens. He is our OG and our first guest. He always talks about having doubles man and being able to do a cashless transaction, which is just quintessential being from Trinidad and Tobago. So we all hoping and wishing and dreaming we are going to be more familiar with that, and we're going to be there soon. So we can't have this live show in March without having the discussion around Women's Day as it relates to Women's Month. And for those who may have missed it, there was a discussion around the data, women being smarter than men. He didn't really say that, but I have to say that, right? But you can mention as well and reiterate what you discussed earlier. But, what advice do you have when it comes to women and young women in Trinidad and Tobago about having a smarter conversation about money and taking charge of their finances?
I think in that respect, Pauline, to me, the key word there would be independence, financial independence. I think it's important for women to be financially independent. I know gender roles have changed over the years, but there are some persons who still feel that they need to depend on somebody else. And if one has a goal of financial independence, it is important that you begin to think about financial planning. So in that context, all of the things that I spoke about relative to financial literacy will apply. It's important to develop savings habits. It is important to understand budgeting, and one would think, and I think this is true, that women do a better job of budgeting than men, but still they would need to understand how to establish priorities in the context of scarce resources. I get back to the whole concept of investing, and I make a distinction between saving and investing. Saving is more passive. It's about maybe putting $50 aside each month to go into an account. Investing has a longer term horizon, and depending on one's goals, you could put together a portfolio comprising of bonds or equities, as well as mutual funds. I often make the point that one does not have to be wealthy to invest. We have a lot of members who offer mutual funds. There are a lot of mutual fund providers, which would allow the man in the street to invest using those instruments. And depending on the type of mutual fund that one invests in, you would have exposures to some of those instruments that I talk about, whether it be a fixed income fund, which would give you exposure to bonds, whether it be an equity fund, which would give you exposure to investments. It may give you exposure to US investments. So I think from a International Women's Day perspective, it's really about helping our young women to develop the skills, behavior, attitudes to manage their affairs themselves. And I think in that regard, mentorship is probably also important. So I think those women who have been successful and who know how to manage finances and understand it have an obligation to probably mentor the younger ones and get involved in various CSOs that would help develop financial literacy among our women.
I'm shaking my head because it's my biggest takeaway from this goes back to what we were talking about with economic diversification, where savings and investment isn't the same thing. So being able to understand and for you to expand on that, for me, that's such clarity, because savings is, if you could just give me a quick, before we close off, what do you think is the biggest difference between savings and an investment?
Savings is passive. Savings is just putting aside a portion of your income and not using that for consumption. It doesn't necessarily mean that money is going to work for you or grow. Investing is using those savings and putting into an instrument that would provide you with potentially two things. One is income, whether that income be interest income in the context of a fixed income instrument, and potentially capital gains. So in equities, you could get income in terms of dividend income, but if you're consistent in terms of investing in the stock market, in the long run, you would definitely also benefit from the capital appreciation of that investment. So savings is passive. It doesn't necessarily mean that your money is working for you. You could save money in a savings account that has very low interest rate, particularly these days, as opposed to using the savings that you have there and invest it in mutual funds in anticipation of capital appreciation in the long term, as the underlying investments in those funds grow in value. That would be the distinction.
And I just want to mention, this is let me just where am I? I just want to mention this was also something that we discussed previously on the show, which is investment in Trinidad and Tobago. So we're going to put those shows on the comment section. So it might be here, it might be there, depending on where you watched it. But it was a very informative session about investment. So on that note, I want to say thank you so much to Keston Howell. I mean, to say this was insightful is not doing it justice. But if you miss any of this, don't worry. Once we are finished with this live stream, you can look at it at the replay. We're also on TV6. We put that information as well on our live show sign up. So you can sign up for our live show content. Again, that's again in the comment section. So thanks again to Keston for joining us as the new Executive Director at Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. And don't forget to sign up to be notified for our next live show in the link in the comments. As always, be sure to like and follow pages across social media so you don't miss a single live show. Thanks again for joining us today. Looking forward to seeing you soon. Bye.